My talk today, beginning properly, is how music moves us. Me giving a talk on music is like a fish talking about water. If fish could talk, but they don't because water doesn't propagate sound vibrations, and therefore fish don't talk. But like water, in that I could almost say that music is a medium in which I live and move and have my being, to paraphrase a greater writer. So I want to focus on what matters most in music, not just for me, but for the individuals we all are, for the cultures that we share, and even for how we understand our human potential. Beginning from music's physical movements, I want to consider how we are moved emotionally and spiritually, how musical forms transpose to give us perspective on our particular lives, how music moves social movements, and even where music might carry us as Unitarian Universalists. Not too much to take on, right? Music moves us, of course, because it is movement. Physical motions, voice, drum, strings, or synthesizer impart vibrations packed with information, move from circuitry at the source to the circuitry by which our brains unpack all that data so we hear music. Those vibrations would be lost in the vacuum of space, and water is too dense a medium, but some amphibious ancestor lollygagged at the shadows for enough thousands of years to grow air sacs that could become ancestors of our hearing. Of course, in anatomical terms, it isn't our ears that hear, but our brains. Interestingly, before we actually hear the sound, the incoming signal gets broken into different elements: pitch, duration, loudness, and these are processed in different areas of the brain. It's only when the brain puts those modules together into a whole that we actually hear the sound. Well, there went 40 milliseconds of my life. Music accentuates elements that are found throughout sound generally in nature. Rhythm may be the most obvious feature of how music moves us. It may arise from the massed muscles of a drum team, the guitarist's strumming hand, or a pianist's left-hand-driven boogie. But vocal cords train to very fine rhythms as well. Music communicates its rhythm because our listening bodies are receptive. From tiny hairs that vibrate in sympathy to brain circuits that entrain to the rhythm that's heard. Daniel Levitin relates an experiment that surprised him and his fellow researchers. I just finished reading his 2024 book, I Heard There Was a Secret Chord, Music as Medicine. As a matter of fact, aside here, I was working on putting a sermon together, and I saw a Washington Post review of that, and I ordered it online, and I happened to be up earlier in the morning than I should have been, and it said, it'll come here tonight if you spend $10 more. I found $10 more to spend, so I got it all read before I put the sermon together. Interesting book. Music is Medicine. The brain waves of people listening, I'm quoting the author of that book, Daniel Levitin, who also wrote This Is Your Brain on Music and 6 songs that tell a story, something like that. The brain waves of people listening to the same piece of music actually synchronized. Common structures spanning the brain had come into harmony with one another. A later experiment using fMRI imaging found that same synchrony even between listeners who were separated in time and in space. Different people at different points in time listening to the same music and having the same patterns of brain activity. This is profound. You and I can be moved. Our brain waves can move in the same ways to the same music. That sort of validates fan psychology, that special feeling when you listen to music that not everybody knows, that you belong to something, that you are like others, some you know and some unknown to you, who are on to something. You may even identify strongly enough that your band shirt is a badge of your identity. REM when they were indie, or perhaps the real K-pop, whatever that might be. There's an important caveat to that synchronization, though, in our listening, and that is that you have to turn the page to read it. Just kidding. Everything depends on whether we like that music. When we do, the savage beast is soothed. Our reptilian brains leave the doors open. When we dislike music, those same brain sentinels are alarmed at this intrusion, and by reflex, those doorways try to shut it out. This is why Levitin concludes what he calls his most robust finding, that self-selected music is far more effective than music selected by someone else for nearly every application of music as medicine, or what a more technical person might call music therapy. I could have told you that when I was an undergraduate. I've been mixing my own musical medicine ever since.
Been self-dosing?
No medicine in here. Just wetting my voice. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Said you've been self-dosing, mixing your own medicine. I said you've been self-dosing.
Yeah. Mixing up the medicine. I've been mixing my musical medicine ever since, often in the form of mixed tapes or mixed CDs. Sure, almost everyone picks music they know will better suit the activity at hand, or will put them in the mood that they want to be in, as opposed to the one they find themselves lingering in almost involuntarily. Different musics are great for exercise, for concentration, for relaxation, but music can also be my philosopher's stone for what a chapter in my book calls gathering myself in music. Yes, in one sense of gathering, I surround myself with music, but my most ambitious and meaningful mixes are attempts to gather myself, in the spirit of someone saying, pull yourself together, when I might feel I'm falling apart or feeling undone by life's chaos. For my medicinal, metaphysical music mixing to magisterially work, there's got to be an M word for work, right? I need two things that are almost opposite. First, I need the music to be me. I'm not a musician, so this won't be my music in the sense of a composer or a performer. But it has to sound like, yeah, this is me, all right. But I'm making my audible self-image out of other people's music. That means someone else has to be singing my songs. And you all know that special feeling when you hear something and you go, whoa, this could have been written just for me. You know that one? You know that feeling? Yeah, I bet. Because music is expressive, I can gather music that expresses me, music that can sing to me the soundings of my life right now, the what's going on of this day and week in where I am in the arc of whatever life I'm trying to lead. And no one song or singer has to get it exactly right. This is the cool part for those of you who do mixes up like this. This is the really cool part. No one song has to get it right, because it's in the interplay and the balance and the contrast and the dynamics of all that stuff that makes it just as rich as life, just as dynamic, just as complex. There's still those plot thickening elements that you wouldn't just pick out to lift your spirits in and of themselves. So by being able to draw on all those facets, maybe no one of them gets it quite exactly right, but together they give me the kaleidoscopic convergence of who I feel to be that I wasn't sure of until I put that particular blend in place. I compose the blend that I hope will bring all my facets together. I share this with you not to dwell on my own musical medicine, but to reach toward music's profound elemental power. One way of getting to it is to consider how our brain's default mode network is engaged in our experience of music. When we aren't focused on something in our external environment, the brain defaults to a rest state where our thoughts flow in reverie, self-reflection, or unguided daydreaming. You might say that there's one pathway, mechanism, network in the brain that's focused on attention, that's related to executive function and selecting things out and analysis. And the default mode is sort of the opposite of that. It's the relaxing, letting go, which at its best is also involved in a flow state where you spend years and hours of training in the analytic part to get to the part where it's second nature, and you can default to that. So, Levitin summarizes the way the default mode network works like an on-off switch. If the DMN's neurochemical switch keeps toggling on and off, we experience successive lapses of attention and absent-mindedness as it messes up whatever we're doing. If the switch gets stuck in the off position, we can't disengage our focus from an absorbing task. We're stuck in whatever we're focused on and pulling us along. If it gets stuck in the on position, that is, if it goes to default and won't get out of there, we can't be easily pulled back into a task that needs to be done. As an aside, let me mention that there are two classes of persons that he talks about who reach a state through the default mode that transcends both the daydreamy kind of that and the analytic side. And those two classes of people who've been studied experimentally are meditators and schizophrenics. Now, before you start making some comment, let me point out that there's a profound difference in how they rise above that, so that in the brains of the meditators, I didn't write down the technical parts of which brains align with what, but there is an enhanced linkage, an enhanced synchronization, an enhanced efficiency even of the connection between networks within the brain, so that everything you're doing works better if you're that meditator.
You're focused and in flow at the same time.
It's flow.
Yeah,
It's beyond the distinction of, I'm paying attention to this and I'm just going with it.
Yeah.
For schizophrenics, they also transcend the distinction, but nothing works because there's a reduction in the integration of those different neural networks. So one of the things I was going to do that you're not going to hear today because I didn't think it up yet is to go from that example about mindfulness and about meditation and the effects within the brain and the sustained effects of that to talk about how spirituality might in some ways be, if not reducible to, which I would never argue, that we might be inspired in our spiritual practices by that finding about meditators. Instead, you get what follows.
Instead, you get what follows.
What I'm going to say is what I wrote instead of talking about that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take too much of your time. Big topic.
You get the B side. The B
side.
Oh, am I giving you the B side when you wanted the A side? Too bad.
No.
All right, that means we're in the special club of the inside folk that get it, who know how to flip it over and get the real thing. Here's what I wrote instead. By engaging the default mode network, music allows my brain to reconcile the opposites I need in order to gather myself in music. Levitin explains when we are not task-oriented in listening to music, instead just letting it wash over us and through us, this self-reflection naturally comes up. That part of that default mode network can be a self-reflective reverie, and that naturally comes up when we bathe ourselves in music. So in other words, music through that washing process that connects me with that default mode is especially conducive to to me reflecting on who I am, where I am, what I am, in a way that doesn't have to get bogged down in analytical stuff or in superego self-doubt. There's the self part of it. The self-reflection naturally comes up. Now, add to that the critical ingredient of communication. What lets me feel that this other singer is singing my song, and this is Levitin again. New studies show that default module network activity between two or more individuals becomes synchronized when they process shared narratives. And this is what happens when people listen to the same music. So what I said before about people in different times and places hearing the same song, their brain waves act the same. They're synchronized in that. And this follows from a different finding about narratives. So the stories that we tell to understand ourselves are often cultural. They're steeped in where we come from, where we live, where we see ourselves to be going. And so when people share a narrative, their brains do that. And music takes that sharing that they found in narrative and maps it back onto the direct perceptual experience of the music. So this is what happens when we listen to music even at different times. Music literally puts my brain on the same wavelength as other listeners. The wavelength the singer intentionally performs, evokes, and even induces. Of course, music is a powerful bonding agent. We know that from eons of culture. From martial music, talking drums, call and response, gamelan, raga, from the nationalist classical manifestos of Dvorak, Mussorgsky, and Sibelius. What Levitin's telling of the default mode network shows me is the glue that sticks that we feeling to my brain. Not only that, it's what joins my identity in that communal we. I may gather myself in or out of or from expressive songwriters like Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, India Arie, or Marvin Gaye. I might flatten to blues, jump to boogie, improvise to farther horizons, or channel a gospel shout. But all these genres, however I enjoy them, are cultural traditions. They have roots in a history in which people shared practices to sustain that music and also to transform the music shared. Genres don't stand still. Our musical forms don't begin fully formed, and for a long time now, our musical forms have been multi-cultures. One of my favorite genres is rock and roll, and one of my favorite book titles is What Was the First Rock and Roll Record? The short answer is that there isn't one. There isn't a definition, formula, or recipe you can use to rule a song in or out of the class of rock and roll. No. Musical genres follow what the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said about language. Words carry their meaning not by strict definition, but the way each of us carries our looks, as family resemblances. I do have to remark that the latest date you can pick for the first rock and roll record is 1949, because they're two just slam dunk examples way before, or at least a little bit before, the 50s even began. So let's take what I observed early. Let me also say, by the way, that rock and roll is not a fusion of rockabilly and rhythm and blues, because the records I'm talking about are rhythm and blues. I can tell you afterwards if you're interested. So let's take what I observed earlier about music's power to bond the reflective self into a community. And let's also observe that communities' roots are in cultural tradition. I love the recent term roots music for traditional elements, for instance, of American blues and Appalachian string band and gospel. Maybe all music is roots music when we're steeped in it. Babies a year old still prefer music they heard in the womb. The music we liked most as teens remains our tonic the rest of our lives. For most of us, punning on the word tonic is both the home key and the thing you take to cut the symptoms of feeling bad. There is strength in tradition, which also makes it solid ground for new takeoffs. We live in an age where it can all go back to roots, and we live in an age where anything from the roots up can be played as alt anything, using that hyphenated form. But where do we want to go? We can stream a flood of music, from the arcane to the K-popular. I want to close by focusing on the very special we that's in this room right now. Y'all souls. You can tell a lot about a congregation by what they value in their worship service. Other UU congregations I'm involved in add a professional or expert lay performance to a couple of varying hymns and a couple of sung set pieces. Y'all souls like to sing together. I won't belabor all that I've learned about the many benefits of music. Suffice it to say, you do not have to be a professional musician to be changed by music in lasting ways. Perhaps for that music to change you and even the community in which you have your being. Good ways, even as better people, certainly a better community of folks intent on a mission to make the community better too. So, if music is medicine, I'll conclude with a prescription I think you can comply with. Let your ministry, your outreach, your witness be shaped to the same spirit you celebrate together when you sing on Sundays like this. Thank you.